Welcome to the Cody Felger Podcast, a podcast dedicated to talking Colts football. Here is your host, Cody Felger.
With the number 49th overall pick, the Indianapolis Colts select Ben Banogu, linebacker out of TCU. Andrew, what stands out about Banogu's game?
That was kind of a surprising pick, much similar to when the Colts took Darius Leonard last year, and nobody really knew who he was. Turns out, that his production spoke for itself. But with Banogu out of TCU, from what I understand, Chris Ballard said he wants to play him at defensive end, but he's so ginormous in terms of his physical stature. He's 6'3", he's got great speed, and I think he has the ability to play linebacker as well as defensive end. I think he's a very versatile player. I think he's going to play right alongside Darius Leonard and Anthony Walker, and I think he's going to do very, very well. And the more I go back and I watch his tape at TCU and I watch the production that he had and the speed that he has coming off the edge in terms of when he plays defensive end, I think he's going to turn out to be a fantastic player.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that he can obviously rush the passer. I mean, at TCU, he had 8.5 sacks back-to-back seasons, so he's no stranger to that. But I also know that Banogu's talked about how he's planning on playing the Sam position right beside Anthony Walker and Darius Leonard. And so I kind of look at this guy, man, as sort of like that, how most offenses have that gadget-type player. So like the Colts, for example, Nyheim Hines last year, or the Tyreek Hill type players. I kind of think of Banogu sort of in that way, just on the defense. He's kind of a player you can move all around. He's kind of a gadget guy in a way where he can rush the passer, he can play linebacker, he can do all these things for you, and that's definitely an important player to have for sure. So who's a player, you mentioned Darius Leonard, but who's a pro player that you think he can really emulate, that we can kind of expect him to be and kind of have the same tendencies as?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. One that I actually wasn't prepared for.
That's okay.
That's all right. Let me see who I can come up with here. I mentioned Darius Leonard, and I really, I think I'm going to stick with that.
Okay.
I really think they're very similar in size. I think Banogu maybe has an inch on Leonard. I think Leonard is 6'2". But in terms of, I guess I don't really see Leonard playing defensive end. But when you line Banogu up at linebacker, I see similar ball instincts. I see open field tackle ability. I see, a nose for the ball, and I see, I see really, really strong potential in Banogu. And I think, like I said earlier, with lining up next to Darius Leonard and Anthony Walker, I think he's going to be potentially the quote-unquote Darius Leonard of this year's draft. Now, I'm not sure, about all pros and that kind of production, that, of course, that'd be fantastic. But in terms of, his ability and his upside, I think he is going to be, I think he's going to surprise a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. I know that he's a guy that's very, very athletic, very fast, and that's kind of very long player, and that's that's similar, almost mirroring Darius Leonard. It's kind of scary how it is a second-round pick just like last year. But, yeah, I definitely think that he's a piece, and it's kind of like the Colts are at a place now where they have good players on their team, and just adding more talent, adding more speed, adding more potential to their defense, I think, is something that the defense can never have too much of, and especially the Colts defense with all the different things that they do on their defense. I think he can definitely add a different element to this team that maybe their defense was lacking last year. And, talking about like him playing the Sam, I think I guess I want to get your opinion on this. I think that last year when we looked at how the Colts use a Sam, they used Zaire Franklin, Matthew Adams, guys who are really kind of run stoppers, kind of the big thumper guys, the good kind of the bigger players, not too great in coverage. But I think he will have a different role if and when he does start at that Sam linebacker position. So what kind of role do you think that he can have in this Colts defense as a Sam linebacker?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it on the head with Zaire Franklin and the other gentleman, I can't think of his name. But with Ben Banogu, I just think if he is to play that Sam linebacker position, or if we were to place him there, I think he would thrive in both zone coverage and run stuffing ability. I think he is that gifted in terms of his physical stature, in terms of his playmaking ability. I'll go back to what I said earlier about his ball instincts. I mean, like you said, he had 8.5 sacks last year at TCU. And I mean, he's someone that sort of jumps out to me, and I'm sure to a lot of other people as well. And there's a reason, Chris Ballard thinks so highly of him. I go back to, what Chris Ballard said about how he found Darius Leonard going to the Senior Bowl, and he and a couple other scouts noticed, that Darius Leonard could potentially be a special player. And it turns out that he's proving them right. And I think the same goes for Ben Banogu, and he's going to fill a very similar role to what Darius Leonard does in our scheme.
Yeah, definitely. And then the Colts came back in the third round and selected another linebacker. This one from Stanford, actually announced by Pat McAfee. By the way, that was great. His roast of the Titans. Oh my goodness, that was wonderful. But anyways, 89 overall, they select Bobby Okereke from Stanford. He's kind of undersized a little bit. I think he's around 5'11" as a linebacker. Questions about his height, I think a little bit were maybe why he fell. What do you think he can add to this defense?
I think Okereke is a very unique individual with great ball instincts and great tackling ability. I've gone back and watched some of his film at Stanford. I think he's a very good open field tackler. I think, if I remember correctly, when he was selected, or when we selected him, Daniel Jeremiah or whomever did the draft breakdown of him mentioned something about his wingspan, mentioned something about how he has the ability to, although he's only 5'11", to really, get up there and bat balls down to the line of scrimmage and read the quarterback's eyes very, very well for somebody that isn't really as tall as most linebackers would be or would be expected to be, I suppose. But I think he's going to be a very, very interesting player, like I said, with his open field tackling ability, his ball instincts, and then his wingspan. I think is going to be something to keep an eye on.
And then the Colts came back again in the fifth round, and they took a player that I think a lot of people were like, who in the world is this? They took E.J. Speed out of Tarleton State. Now, I admittedly don't know anything about this guy. What do you know from watching? I know he didn't have a ton of film, but what do you know from kind of hearing the Colts talk about this guy and kind of what you've seen of Mr. Speed?
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you. I've seen very little on Mr. Speed, but what I do know is his name speaks for itself. He's very, very fast, and he's very versatile. I think he can play all three linebacker positions, and I think he is going to bring much depth and much physicality to a linebacker room that already consists of, like we talked about with Darius Leonard, Anthony Walker, Zaire Franklin, Matt Adams, and Ben Banogu. And I think E.J. Speed has a really good shot at making the final 53-man roster. Like I said, his speed, oddly enough, ironically, was something that jumped out to me.
Yeah, definitely. And I know, it's kind of an interesting story. I don't know everything about the story, but just kind of hearing, Chris Ballard talk about this guy, he wasn't on the Colts radar at all till I don't even know if it was a month out. And they saw this guy and they saw his tape and they're just like, who is this guy? They were intrigued and they fell in love with him. And I mean, to draft him in the fifth round, it's not like he's maybe he's a little bit of a project, but still a fifth-round pick. I mean, that's still a decent pick there. So the Colts must know something that a lot of people don't. What kind of traits do you think the Colts see in this guy? You mentioned his speed, but what do you think are some other things that the Colts have, their tendency is to look in their linebackers?
Well, I look at a guy like Anthony Walker. When Chris Ballard drafted him, he was a fifth-round pick, and nobody really knew who he was. And he was bigger, 6'1". I'm not really sure of E.J. Speed's height, but I look at a guy like E.J. Speed, and I see instincts, I see playmaking ability, I see sideline to sideline, I see the ability to read the quarterback's eyes very well. I see open field tackling, and like I said, I haven't seen much of it, but I'll say this. I've learned to not question Chris Ballard, especially after last year's draft and the draft that he had the year before. Any pick that he makes, no matter the position, no matter the player, no matter the background, I've learned to just go with it and trust him. And so I think if he sees something and the Colts personnel staff sees something in E.J. Speed that we as fans may not see, I think we have no reason to think twice about him.
Definitely. And just to answer your question there on E.J. Speed, 6'3", 225. I mean, so he is a tall guy, tall, big linebacker. And you mentioned he's fast, super, super fast. And so, I think it's speed. It'll probably be length. And I think that's kind of what the Colts have looked for in their linebackers and, what they'll continue to look for going forward. And so, Andrew, I just want to take a look now from 2018 now to 2019, this Colts linebacker room. I mean, the depth that they've added is just insane. I mean, kind of early in the draft, too, kind of the depth that they've added. So what do you think is going to happen with these linebackers as, training camp approaches, preseason approaches, and eventually when the Colts have to make those cuts to the 53-man roster?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that it'll really come down to who wants it more. Chris Ballard talks about never having enough players in any specific position and be willing to come in and compete for a position like it's like you're not going to make the 53-man roster. And I think it really just comes down to who wants it more.
Yeah,
I suppose that's a very vague answer, but who wants it more? Who's willing to come in early and get those extra reps in? Who's willing to come in and maybe lead the other guys along? Who's willing to come in and maybe showcase something that Chris Ballard and his personnel staff and Frank Reich and Matt Eberflus didn't see prior to drafting?
Yeah, definitely. And I think with the guys that they've drafted, you mentioned how good they are in coverage. And I think that's something that the Colts linebackers, for a few years now, they've struggled in is that coverage, covering the tight ends. And I think that's something that the Colts really look to improve. And you talked about Okereke and his coverage ability, and then just the other linebackers they've drafted. I mean, they've drafted guys who are fast, and I think that's important. And guys that are big, too, whether that's height or, length. I think the Colts have really looked for that. And so it's interesting to me, Andrew, just the comparison from last year to this year. Last year the Colts drafted 2 guys in the 7th round and they made the roster for the linebackers. And compared to last year, I mean, it's going to be a lot harder, especially at the linebacker, corner, and wide receiver position to make this roster compared to previous years with the Colts. And so that's really, really interesting. Also, the Colts drafted another defender, no, not a linebacker, surprisingly, a defensive end, 199th overall from Mississippi State, Gerri Green. Now, who is Green? I don't know really much about him, so tell me who Gerri Green is and what he can bring to this Colts roster.
Yeah, from the little tape that I've seen of Gerri Green, I mean, he reminds me a lot of Kamoko Toure, who we picked in the 2nd round last year. More of a speed rusher than a power rusher, but great instincts, great ability to get after the quarterback, which is, of course, something you definitely want to see in a pass rusher. And I think he's got a really good chance to make the final 53-man roster. I mean, of course, I think all of these players do, but Gerri Green, there's just something that sort of sticks out to me when I watch him. I can't think, like I said, Kamoko Toure, and there's maybe a couple other players that I can't really think of right now on the top of my head, but he just stands out.
Yeah, definitely. I think I actually mispronounced his name. I think it's Gerri, technically. Gerri Green, whatever it is. We're looking forward to having him on the roster as well. It'll be interesting to see him compete in that deep defensive end rotation. In total, the Indianapolis Colts had 10 draft picks and spent 4 of them on the defensive front 7. So it'll be interesting to see how these guys get equated to the Colts system and what they can bring to the defense in 2019 and beyond.